Hey the people, how you doing? So, yes, it has been quite a while since I've made a video. Well, partly because I had my mid-sems, which are very annoying, and of course, we didn't really have any major flagships to work with and really compare cameras, But now, we do have the iPhone 14 Pro. And yes, it is terribly expensive. In India and in some parts of Europe, the price has actually gone up, even though the launch price is still $1,000 for the Pro at least. But yeah, situation is pretty terrible, needless to say, but, well, the iPhone 14 Pro, regardless of the price, is actually still going to be probably one of the most interesting iPhones that you're gonna see. Because up until now, we have probably had some of the biggest changes that Apple has ever made. They don't really do big changes, and quite a few of them at once. And well, let's just say that it's gonna be an interesting time with the iPhone 14 Pro. But before that, we have to do a really fast unboxing. So as expected, we are very intimately familiar with what we can get in the box. It's a lightning cable, we have some paperwork, Apple sticker, and of course, the SIM ejector tool. Yes, we do get a SIM ejector tool because we have a SIM card. Well, a physical SIM card tray, in Indian iPhones at least. But anyways, regardless of that, this right here is the iPhone 14 Pro, and man, let's just begin with the design because that's the most interesting area. But first, the camera module, it looks very similar to what we had in the iPhone 13 Pro. So what we have here is a slightly thicker camera module. I think it actually makes it easier to hold in the hand. You can just, press your index finger like this and, it makes it easier to hold, at least in my opinion. But it is up front where the real fun begins because we finally do not have a notch. I've waited far too long to say that line in particular. But yeah, what we have now is a pill-shaped cutout. You might remember that we did have pill-shaped cutouts in Android phones. I think back when the S10 Plus launched, we had a pill-shaped cutout for that on the side. But yeah, it's very similar to that, maybe slightly longer. But, if you think about it, there's a lot of stuff going on inside that tiny little cutout that we have now instead of a much larger, much wider notch. All of the specialized tech that you need for Face ID to work and to be as secure as it is, it's all been compressed into that little cutout now. I mean, it doesn't even span the full cutout. We actually have dead pixels in between. But anyways, point is that it actually is quite a technological feat because it's not just a selfie camera that we are talking about in a cutout. It's a lot of other sensors as well. And if you remember, this is probably the biggest design change upfront at least, since the iPhone 10. That was back in 2017. All this time, we've had the notch and, it kept getting more and more stale and more annoying to look at. And finally, we have something that looks at least a little different. It takes up at least a little bit less space and, it's a step in the right direction. That's really all that's going on here. And it's a good thing that we have a new, better looking design. But of course, Apple didn't really stop there, and it's kind of a surprising move if you think about it, because Apple tends not to go above and beyond like this, but they decided to integrate this pill, or what they like to call the dynamic island, into the software. There are a lot of small things that happen right around our little pill cutout, or dynamic island, whatever you want to call it, and I think it looks pretty good. It looks very well integrated, and there are a lot of small animations that just it somehow makes the user experience better. Usually, I'm not a huge fan of iOS. If you've seen any of my review videos about the iPhone 13 Pro, or even the complete comparisons, you'd know that I am not a huge fan. But honestly, I think this is a very cool addition, and it just makes the whole pill cutout more a part of the software than basically any other punch hole design that we have, up until now at least. And yes, Android is already getting apps that can implement this sort of dynamic island look on Android phones as well, so I'm pretty sure we'll get a fairly refined version in a fair bit of time. So yeah, this might be iPhone exclusive at the moment, but I'm pretty sure that sooner rather than later it will be something that we can see or at least expect on Android phones as well. And by the way, Apple also managed to shrink the bezels around the display. It's actually reduced the overall footprint of the iPhone 14 Pro and also consequently the Pro Max just a little bit. We still have the same display sizes, but the footprint has gone down by just a little bit. And then of course, the display. Now this is also where we have quite a few upgrades and stuff to talk about. Firstly, the brightness, up to 2000 nits on the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. Now that right there, that's impressive. Like it's the brightest display that I've ever heard of on any smartphone. Thus far we had displays like the S22 Ultra, which could do 1700 nits, and that was already really bright, and I mean it almost never had any issues even in direct afternoon sunlight. This is just gonna get better, and it's gonna get better even with HDR content, because you know how it is. We get better brightness, the better your HDR content will look. How much of a difference it's gonna make, especially compared to some of the brightest phones that we have right now, like the S22 Ultra, I'll talk about that more in the review once I've used it a little. But yeah, I must say, this is a very impressive display right now. Not to mention, we also have a slightly more advanced version of LTPO. That's basically variable refresh rate, meaning that we can have 120Hz for the smoothness, but when the screen is idle and nothing's really moving in there, no animations and so on, we can ramp it down, this time around all the way to 1Hz, which consequently allowed Apple to give us the always on display. And well, it's a good implementation. I mean, the idea, the philosophy behind it is good. What you can do here is basically you can choose a wallpaper for your lock screen, and then that wallpaper is going to be dimmed down for the always on display, which technically means a ton of customizability. I mean, you can have any wallpaper you choose, meaning that you can have any background you want for your always on display on your iPhone 14 Pro. But that also brings certain issues. You see, always on displays tend to consume a fair bit of battery, especially on standby. Now, iPhones have historically had some of the best standby times in terms of their battery. But now that we have always on display, and that too with this slightly unorthodox implementation right here, some people might experience a lot of battery loss, while others, depending on their wallpaper, might not. Now, of course, again, technically speaking, you could probably save up on a lot of battery when you're using a solid black background as your wallpaper for lock screens, but then you're losing out on the lock screen wallpaper altogether. How many people are comfortable with that? I'm not entirely certain, but I can tell you, I'm probably going to use a very dark wallpaper for my lock screen, because otherwise I know for a fact that the always on display is going to eat the battery alive. No one likes that, trust me. Now, of course, the performance on battery, we all know how this goes, right? Apple, once again, has the fastest chipset on any smartphone. Now, it's not an exceptionally faster chipset from the iPhone 13 Pro, but let's face it, Apple still makes some of the fastest silicon, and this is no different. We still have really high processing speeds here, and I'm pretty sure that anything you throw at it, whether it's photo editing, video editing even, or gaming, I'm sure they can handle it flawlessly. Then, of course, the battery. Now, this is going to be interesting once again because of the always on display and the standby time. We'll see how far the iPhone gets, and I'll let you guys know about my entire experience in the review. But for now, I'm gonna keep some hopes with, of course, a little pinch of salt, because we never know how badly the standby time is going to be affected, and there could be the very small possibility that I might have to turn off always on display just to save on battery life, which is not a very happy thought now, is it? And by the way, the chipset situation with the 14 Pro, Pro Max and the regular iPhone 14 and 14 Plus is kind of a controversial one, because yes, we have A16 Bionic on the Pro and Pro Max, But on the 14 and 14 Plus, you get a slightly amped up version of the same A15 Bionic, which we had last year. So just keep that in mind, if you really want the latest and greatest, you have to shell out for the iPhone 14 Pro. But with that said, it is now finally time to talk about the most interesting part of the entire iPhone. It's the cameras. Surprisingly so. Because usually, historically almost, we have never had such a big upgrade. Because I think the very last time that we had a huge resolution bump, well, not huge technically, because it was, I believe, from an 8 megapixel to a 12 megapixel. I think it happened with the iPhone 6s. That was way back when. And now finally, we have moved on from 12 megapixels to 48. And that's actually a pretty major jump if you really think about it. But what comes alongside with that is not just the resolution, but also a very large sensor. Just to put it into perspective, we all know about the large 108 megapixel sensor on the S22 Ultra. Now, it may have its issues and all, but for the most part, it's a very good and large sensor. And now, with the 48 megapixel sensor on the iPhone, we, for the first time in many years, have a sensor on the iPhone 14 Pro which is larger than Samsung's best offering thus far. That is quite an achievement almost, I must say, because the larger the sensor, the better your photo quality is going to be, given that the software is taking proper advantage of it, because hardware is only going to be 50%. And Apple tends to be very good with software for the most part. There are still some areas that are just not good, some things with highlights. We have all seen the issues at this point, at least. And well, this 48 megapixel sensor, it's not the resolution that really matters all that much. It's going to be that sensor size, because it's going to give us two major things that we didn't really have before in previous iPhones, which had smaller 12 megapixel sensors, a much better natural depth of field, and of course really good low light capabilities. And by the way, because we have a 48 megapixel sensor, Apple has also decided to give us 2x cropped in zoom. Now, this isn't this typical digital crop that we get in most other smartphones. Here, what Apple is apparently doing is they are basically cropping into the sensor, using the centered 12 megapixels of the larger 48 megapixel part. And essentially what you're getting is, instead of a digital crop, which is generally very low quality, you are getting a smaller 12 megapixel sensor inside of the main camera. I think that's the best way to technically explain it, I guess. I'm not sure. But yeah, point is that you should technically get really good 2x zoomed in, portraits, normal zoomed in shots. Even with night mode, it should work out really well. But of course, the camera comparisons and the tests that are gonna come really soon, they're gonna tell us exactly how good that 2x zoom is. Definitely something that I'm really interested in, because 2x zoom can be amazing for portraits. So if it really works out well, then it's a huge advantage in favor of Apple. And then of course we have our good old 3x telephoto zoom. It's one of the highest quality 3x telephotos that we have in almost any smartphone. And finally, for the ultra-wide camera, which has also seen a mild sensor upgrade, basically a higher quality sensor, no resolution bump or anything like that. I wish there was, but we don't really have anything as such. And basically, we should get better photos, videos, and low light performance in general from the ultra-wide as well. Definitely something I'm gonna look forward to testing out, especially with the photos. It's gonna be really interesting with this one. And as for videos, well, do I need to tell you that the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max are gonna be the best for video? I don't think so. And finally, we have action mode. This is very similar to the super steady modes or super stable modes that we have had in many Android flagships thus far, for quite a few years actually. But what Apple has done is not only give us really good stabilization, but instead of dropping all the way down to 1080p and just really killing the quality altogether, which is usually the case when you use super stable or super steady on other smartphones, we're getting 2.8K. That's somewhere between 4K and 1080p. So presumably the quality should be really good. And of course, there are definitely things that I wished we had, because the hardware capability here, given that we have 48 megapixels, I had really hoped to see 8K video on the iPhone 14 Pro. It is capable of shooting 8K at this point. And then of course the selfie camera, it has seen a aperture increase, which means better low light and so on and so forth. I really hope the selfie night mode has improved. because that's been one of the pain points in previous iPhones, for me at least. Definitely a feature that the iPhone should be capable of doing really well given how good regular night mode tends to be. So I sincerely hope that the selfie night mode game has gone up on the iPhone. And so with all of that said, I'm pretty sure this one would end up being slightly longer than most impressions video that I have, but you know, for an iPhone with this many upgrades, it's definitely worth it. I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with this one, especially with the cameras and, you know, the overall change in design. It just feels fresh for an iPhone. I mean, a design change like this on any Android phone, we wouldn't even regard it as anything significant. We'd talk about it and then we'd forget about it. But on the iPhone, this is a big deal because iPhones tend not to change at all. And I think this is a nice step in the right direction. Now, I know for a fact that for the next 5 years, this is the exact same design that we're gonna have. And, well, we'll see how things go. But for now, I think things are gonna be really interesting. Once again, especially for the cameras, so definitely stay tuned for the camera comparisons. Subscribe if you aren't already because you do not want to miss out on them. And of course, drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll be seeing you guys soon enough. Cheers!